What is going on, everyone? Chris with Journals, Comics, and Pop Culture, and today we got a video talking about the state of DC Comics. Now, this is an article that I'm going to be reviewing that dates back to March, but it's extremely relevant right now. A lot of us know that DC has been a hot topic, especially with this release of a blog article a couple weeks back about how DC is going to kill off print comics come this summer. I think it said June or July, which I'm going to tell you right now was complete BS. This blog site had no credibility whatsoever, but it spread on social media like wildfires, and everyone was talking about it and just ran with it. And I'm like, people, you got to learn how to cite your sources and do your research. So, putting that aside, though, like I said, AT&T and what they're doing with DC has been a huge talk. So I want to dive into this article, guys, and I want to give you some feedback on what I think is going on and where I think this is heading. Now, this individual here, the author of this article, I thought painted a very good picture of what's going on and what's to come. So let's get into this, guys. Is AT&T getting ready to kill DC Comics? Recent actions are sparking fresh rumors that the telecom giant might try and sell the iconic comic book publishing unit. So let's go into what this individual has to say. He states, last year several reports claimed that AT&T could sell DC Comics, which it gained from its stakeholder of Time Warner to appease activist investor Elliott Management's demand to streamline its business and boost its profits. AT&T didn't divest the 85-year-old brand, which owns iconic characters like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, but its recent actions suggest that some changes could occur. First, Warner Brothers abruptly fired DC Comics co-publisher Dan DiDio, who held the top position alongside Jim Lee over the past 10 years. Shortly afterward, a few industry reports claimed that Disney's Marvel could either acquire DC Comics or license its characters for new comics. Lee, now serving as the company's head publisher, quickly dismissed these rumors. And I'm going to agree with that. I don't. So we know that what Disney's been doing, playing chess. Um, they're not touching DC, at least anytime soon. All right, that's my opinion. However, he goes on to state, all of these developments indicate that something is brewing at DC Comics. Could AT&T sell or kill off the storied publisher? Or will it leave the company alone and focus on more pressing issues like the launch of its new streaming services? Right? All right. I love how this guy breaks it down here. All right, going into this, diving deeper into DC Comics. DC's characters provide a lot of creative material for AT&T's WarnerMedia unit, which produces a wide range of movies and TV shows. That's key here, guys, and he connects this later on too. Its 8 DCEU films have grossed 5.5 billion globally over the past 7 years. And that's with so many issues with the DCEU too, right? I mean, that's still a multi-billion dollar platform. Joker, which isn't officially tethered into that universe, grossed 1.07 billion and won 2 Oscars. The CW network, which Warner Media co-owns with Viacom CBS, hosts DC's Arrowverse TV shows, including Green Arrow, The Flash, Supergirl, Legends of Tomorrow, Black Lightning, and Batwoman. Those shows gave DC a stronger and more cohesive foothold in the TV market than Marvel's comparable shows on ABC, Hulu, and Netflix, which is true regardless of what you guys think of the Arrowverse and CW shows. What he's stating about it is very true and how it's solidified the TV market. DC also offers a subscription service, DC Universe, which we all know is moving over to HBO Max, which offers digital access to its films, movies, and comics. All right, moving on. AT&T probably won't sell its media rights to those characters or license them to rival publishers like Marvel. However, DC Comics' publishing business, which sells print and digital comic books, is another story. And I agree with the fact of selling the rights, the media rights, or the licensing. But let's go further because he's going to talk about how these things tie in together even more. Now, this is where I don't agree with them 100% here, and what he's stating, but I'm going to read it. Sales of print comic books peaked during the speculator boom of the 1980s and early 90s, when surging prices for rare issues attracted collectors. Now, this is kind of inaccurate when he says surging prices for rare issues attracted collectors. It's not true. What happened is the mass production of books attracted collectors thinking that they were going to attract high prices, and they weren't rare. They weren't rare, and that was the huge issue that caused the bubble. So I don't know how much of a hobbyist this guy is. He's more of a financial insider, so I just don't know uh, how much he has on the inside of the actual industry in the 80s and 90s. Really bad wording. It doesn't paint the proper picture. But let's go on. That bubble eventually popped, but combined sales of print and digital comics gradually stabilized in North America and grew, which is true, from 105 million to 1.1 billion between 2012 and 2018. And then, of course, it hit 1.2 billion in 2019. So this is very true. And if you take back those numbers all the way to the year 2000, that growth is even more extreme. And if you take it back to 2010, especially when digital first popped off, even larger growth. Okay. However, those sales figures mask two problems. First, big distributors and brick and mortar comic book retailers account for a large portion of those sales. Comic book stores still struggle to attract new readers. Now, again, this is a, how do I put this? This is the whole dilemma of how do we gauge if comic books are if the industry is attracting new readers. Okay, um, saying that it's struggling to do so is ultimately not 100% accurate. I don't want to dive too much into that, but let's go on. He also states many of them were swept away by the retail apocalypse. He's talking about comic book stores. But even with that being the case, I've talked about it a lot. You got to evolve. It's an evolving market. Look, the retail apocalypse isn't something that's just affecting comic books. It's just an evolution of brick and mortar businesses, retail in general. Moving on here. Publishers like DC and Marvel tried to offset those lower unit shipments by hiking prices, but that exacerbated the pain by alienating longtime readers. I think he's being a little too extreme in his wording here, but yes, I've talked about the issue with the $3.99 price point. But let's go on. Second, DC and Marvel's traditional superhero comics are losing ground against other categories of comic books, including graphic novels and Japanese manga, which is true. A recent NPD group study found that sales of superhero comic books accounted for less than 10% of all comic book and graphic novel sales in the US. Now, I don't know. This is the group study. I don't think this is actually factual when you consider graphic novels. I don't. I don't think this is accurate. I've looked at the numbers. I don't have the facts on the table right now, but I'm going to challenge that 10%, including graphic novels, only being superheroes. But let's move on. He says this indicates that the boom of comic book movies isn't boosting sales of actual comics. I'm going to disagree with him 100% right here. I am going to disagree with him. Arguing that point, though, is for a whole nother video. Moving on. How much does DC Comics matter to AT&T? Now, this is the important thing that I want the doomsday sayers and the naysayers and DC is going to stop printing comic books. AT&T doesn't know what they're doing. They're going to kill off comic books. This is where I agree with this individual almost completely, and I want all of you to truly understand this. Let's read. AT&T doesn't disclose DC Comics revenue separately. Instead, it's included in the WarnerMedia segment, which also includes Turner Cable Networks, HBO, and Warner Brothers. DC Entertainment and DC Films are all subsidiaries of Warner, and DC Comics became a subsidiary of DC Entertainment in late 2009. Subsidiaries of subsidiaries here, right? It's kind of hard to follow sometimes under that umbrella. Warner Brothers generated 14.4 billion in revenue, or 43% of Warner Media's revenue and 8% of AT&T's total revenue last year. Within that total, Warner's Games and Other segment, which includes DC Comics, video games, and other products, but excludes its TV and film properties, generated 2 billion in revenue. Breaking it down here. Based on the aforementioned estimate of 1.1 billion in industry sales in 2018. The industry's flat growth over the past 5 years, and Diamond Publishing's report that DC controlled 29% of the comic book market in 2019, we can estimate that DC's publishing unit generated about 300 million in revenue last year. That number's probably a little bit higher because of the 2019 growth. That accounts for just 0.2% of AT&T's annual revenue. So it doesn't really matter if the company keeps or sells the business. Hypothetically, keeping the publishing unit would arguably make more sense since it would allow AT&T to maintain firm control over the characters in print, TV, and film. Let me read this to you again, guys. Even if we're looking at the print comics consisting of only 0.2% of AT&T's annual revenue, keeping the publishing unit would arguably make more sense since it would allow AT&T to maintain film control over the characters in print, TV, and film. That is essential to understand, guys. Let's move on. AT&T probably won't sell or license out DC Comics anytime soon. Elliott Management's moves and the dismissal of Dan DiDio sparked wild rumors, but a sale or licensing deal would arguably weaken AT&T's DC business without significantly reducing its massive long-term debt of $151 billion. I agree. Recent reports also suggest that DiDio was fired due to creative conflicts instead of financial ones. And this goes back to my argument, guys, about quality over quantity. Slimming down, saving money, and prioritizing your resources, guys. But let's go on. DiDio reportedly clashed with writers over his micromanagement of storylines, and his planned 5G reboot for the DC universe likely exacerbated those conflicts. Again, guys, this is where I say you can't have your cake and eat it too. I'm going to get into this though. Moving on. Therefore, it's doubtful that AT&T will sell off or kill DC Comics anytime soon. DC won't significantly boost WarnerMedia's revenue, but its comic book storylines could still provide valuable fodder for future TV and film projects at WarnerMedia. All right, guys. This sums it up to the T. Look, there's two things that you need to focus on. The revenue of print comics can be picked apart, chewed up, and spit out here. And that's where the naysayers can come in and say, the comic book industry is doomed. Print comics are going away. But when you look at the actual number to this big multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, AT&T, 0.2% of their revenue may seem small to them, but it's still a lot of money. And even a multi-billion-dollar entity isn't going to get rid of any type of profit, no matter how small it is. It makes absolutely no sense. But then you have to take into consideration what print media is still doing. It's still a catalyst for other big multi-million and multi-billion dollar product lines. TV, film, animation, toys. Just coming from the storylines of the comics and keeping these characters relevant. All right? That's the most important thing here, guys. We still need new comic books. We still need new storylines. And I'm telling you, as much as you guys think that a lot of these, within the companies or the studios, even within the films, look, that's why on the Marvel end, Kevin Feige is now overseeing the comic books, because we got to start with the comic books, guys. I've said this before. When the MCU was getting big, right? In the first 5 to 7 years or so, right? Plus, the success of the movies allowed the publication, the print books, to take from the movies and bring it back to the books, and it started getting convoluted. Like, okay, well, now you have an Infinity War. in the movies, let's bring Infinity War back to the comic books and do an Infinity Wars and an Infinity this and an Infinity that, right? You have a Civil War in the movie, so let's do a Civil War 2 in the comics. But I see that shifting to where there's going to be more original storylines within the comics that are going to then be brought into film and TV again, okay? I think the same thing's going to happen with DC, and that pairs into what I'm going to say next here about the firing of Dan DiDio. Look, you slim it down because having you need to have quality over quantity, guys, and you take out somebody like look, the same people probably complaining that um print comic books are dying out and AT&T doesn't know what they're doing, they're going to ruin DC, are probably the same ones that complained about the 5G reboot. Oh, here they go again, another reboot and and all this stuff, right? Can't have your cake and eat it too. People don't understand what's going on behind the scenes, guys. I am so, I will take this future state with fresh takes and fresh characters and then slimming down the monthly titles after that. I'll take that any day than another reboot. I would take that any day than another reboot. No, thank you to another reboot. So this shows me, guys, that AT&T, under the leadership of Jim Lee, and what he's talked about over the last few months, okay? They're saying we need to restructure because the business model wasn't working before. And again, the same people that say AT&T's ruining print comics are the same ones that would sit there and agree with Jerry Conway saying the business model isn't working anymore. Okay, so what do you do? What do? You throw it in the trash and you start from scratch. And that's what they're doing. And not, that's just more of a saying. They're not throwing everything away and starting from scratch, but you're slimming down quality control here, and let's maximize quality over quantity, and let's change the business model moving forward. All right, that's what I see happening. Print comics are going nowhere. AT&T is not going to kill print comics. This freaking fake blog article that's been running rampant online about them stopping print in this come next summer is not uh, credible whatsoever, guys. I really appreciate this author for breaking it down. He brings in the business side of it, looking at the financial aspect and what the print comics actually mean to the industry of comic books itself, into these to the bigger companies that own them. All right. So with that being said, guys, that is my take today. AT&T, DC Comics. What do you guys think? Leave your thoughts and comments below, guys. And again, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please take some time to do so. We got links to Journo's Comics, exclusive merch below if you want to check that out. Help support the channel. We got the Patreon link below if you want to become a patron member at only $3.99 a month to get extra perks and to help support the channel. And of course, fellow friends of the channel, all links below, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Be well, and until next time.